Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hearthstone Championship Tour, America's Spring Preliminary. My name is TJ, and I'm joined by Bob and Sottle. You guys can make a restaurant out of that.
It's kind of catchy. It sounds nice together, right, Bob and Sottle? Yeah.
Bob and Sottle's Fish and Chips.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. I'll collect my royalty check at the end of the week. But we have two more matches left to go, guys, and the next one is going to be a doozy. It's APXVoiD taking on Deerjason. And I just want to preface this by saying APXVoiD is known among much of the America's competitive community as being the player who always has Mana Worm on turn 1 in Tempo Mage.
Yeah, you stole my line. I was gonna talk about Tempo Mage and APXVoiD, but no surprise he's chosen to bring Tempo Mage to this tournament. I believe, unless I'm forgetting something tragic, this is the first Tempo Mage we're going to see on stream, at least for the Americas. Does anyone disagree with that? No? Good. We did see Jackie Chan running it with Yogg-Saron topping out the top of the curve in Europe, but no one this weekend. So this will be something refreshing for one of the last games of the day, at least.
Yeah, Bob.
The good news is, hey, he's going to get to play it. It was not banned in the lineup, so sounds great to me.
Yeah, it sounds great to me as well. Tempo Mage has sort of changed a lot since the days pre-standard, pre-whispers of the old gods. Talk me through some of these changes here, Bob, that we're seeing nowadays.
Well, sure. Well, there's a new card in the deck, and that's Faceless Summoner. It's a rather large minion that summons a random 3-cost minion. There's Spell Slinger, which is making its glorious debut again. It was in the deck before. It's in, it's out, it's back, and that can create some wild and amazing plays.
Wild, I see what you did there. Eh?
Eh?
No? Okay.
No one's going with you on that one, TJ. Move on. Move quickly on.
All right. Well, Deerjason is a player that we've actually seen featured on stream a couple times now. He's had a tough road. We saw him lose a match earlier in the day.
Yep.
And APXVoiD has been on the upswing, and Deerjason has sort of been on the downswing as far as today goes. Sottle, as a competitive Hearthstone player yourself for Team Complexity.
Thank you.
What's it like when momentum swings in Hearthstone when you're competing in a tournament like this?
It's a difficult thing. Double elimination brackets is not something I have a huge amount of experience with in Hearthstone. It is something that I have a huge amount of experience with in fighting games. And dropping to loser's bracket, as we call it in fighting games early, is obviously grueling because of the amount of extra games that you have to play. But you are dead on in the fact that you can build up a ton of momentum to get back into that position. Especially, your disadvantage is lessened in this format where you don't have to come all the way back to grand finals to challenge the winner of the winner bracket. You don't have that loser's bracket disadvantage. You only have to progress to a certain point. So the momentum is still very similar. You just have to keep winning no matter where you are in the bracket. So the difference between upper and lower is honestly slightly mitigated.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and we'll definitely have to see. Deerjason has had his Warrior banned away, and Deerjason has been running some. His Mage deck is the Freeze Mage deck, correct?
Yes, indeed. The Torch Freeze, pretty much everyone almost universally agreeing that Torch Freeze is the correct way to play it. So it's actually not, is it? Sorry, I've made a huge mistake. It's Archmage Antonidas. What do you know? What do you know?
Archmage Antonidas, yeah. What are your thoughts on that card nowadays, Bob? A lot of players have been sort of cutting it out of their Freeze Mage lineups to favor the list with Forgotten Torch.
Right. The difference is, hey, can I set up an OTK? Or can I set up a one-turn kill combo without this card here? And the answer to that is yes. With Roaring Torch, which comes from Forgotten Torch, you can actually get a lot more damage to your opponent, which means you don't really need Alexstrasza. Whereas with Archmage, you're kind of relying on saving those low-cost cards. So if you can take out that reliance on combos, it usually ends up being more consistent. However, Archmage has the ability to give you an infinite number of fireballs. In theory.
In theory.
Yeah. So if you need more damage against things like Warrior with a lot of armor, which he's banned out, of course, or other decks, then Archmage might be the way to go.
Yeah, it's definitely a way to pile a lot of total damage into your deck, but you do have to generate a lot before you start compensating for the loss of Forgotten Torch, because each Forgotten Torch you cut from your deck is, arguably 9 damage, but when you factor in the potential for that to have spell damage, etc., it can be more than that. So you do have to be picking up a lot of individual fireballs from Archmage to replace that loss of damage, but like you said, the potential is near endless if that thing can get together with a nice Emperor hand.
All right, well, we're jumping into game 1. It's Freeze Mage versus Tempo Mage. How fitting, the two decks that we talked the most about in the intro. But I'm going to step out. Take it away, boys.
And you, TJ, as you depart, gave APXVoiD the intro as the man who already always has Mana Worm, and you can see right here, living up to that name, Mana Worm in hand. I think one of the most impactful turn 1 plays for the respective win rate of the deck it's in. I think Mana Worm and Tunnel Trog pretty much hold that crown single-handedly.
Absolutely, and when you're against Freeze Mage, you need to put on that early pressure. The Mana Worm can grow a lot, or in some cases, can even draw out that Frostbolt, which is more burn reduced from the deck. Since we know Deerjason is running the Torchless deck, that's kind of what we talked about. He's reducing those chances to not only get more Fireballs later on, but possibly worse.
Yeah, I mean, Forgotten Torch is such a flexible card that you can use in the early game to take out something like a Mana Worm or a Huffer, some sort of early game minion that's too intimidating to leave on the board. Forgotten Torch you're kind of happy to do that with because it puts more damage back in your deck, whereas using a Frostbolt is reducing your win condition significantly.
Mana Worm going to grow a little bit here from an Arcane Missiles. There's spell damage from the other minion on the board there. And yeah, this is very much a spell synergy deck. So all his cards gone. And a hand with just Azure Drake is all that's left. Really taking advantage of that spell power while it's on the board.
It's turn 3 and Jason has lost half of his life. Nearly half of his life is gone. 16 health. This is the power of Mana Worm. And this is why APXVoiD loves Tempo Mage so much. Not only is he known as a Tempo Mage player, he loves the deck. He professes joy for the deck whenever he plays it. And this is the reason why. If you can draw Mana Worm every game, you're going to feel pretty good about Tempo Mage.
Now, Cult Sorcerer, whenever you cast a spell, it does buff Cthulhu. It makes him 1/1. But the power of the card by itself, even without Cthulhu, has warranted a spot in the Tempo Mage deck.
Right, Tempo Mage was kind of looking for a replacement for Mad Scientist anyway, so they needed a solid 2-drop, and we see that's kind of a theme of the meta at the moment, is decks struggling to know which 2-drops they're supposed to play. We see Hunters kind of going with the Elix, sometimes the Toad, and sometimes going, oh, never mind, I'll just play Doomsayers instead. Tempo Mage at least got a solid option, 3/2 spell damage, pretty much exactly what you want for this deck.
Deerjason probably regretting not using that Frostbolt on that Mana Worm early on, instead playing that Loot Hoarder. At this point, that thing has done a lot of damage, more than I have even tried to count, since it's gone by so fast. He's looking for a way out of this at this point. It looks like he might be able to Frostbolt and throw a Fire Blast, his hero power, onto the 3/1. And have just enough ability to survive, provided his opponent doesn't have another spell.
Yeah, he has to find a winning line here somewhere, and playing Ice Block does not seem to be the winning line. Just losing your first Ice Block as early as turn 5 doesn't seem like it's ever going to lead to a position where you win the game. So I like this play, just trying to protect his existing 6 health, playing a little bit fast and loose without developing the Ice Block, but it makes sense because he needs to make sure that Ice Block stays in play long term.
That is 7 damage that Mana Worm dealt, or maybe 8 damage, where it could have only dealt 1. Frostbolt.
Yes, indeed.
All right, Frost Nova still trying to stay in there. Looks like no spell damage just yet in APXVoiD's hand, but he does get the mana. Oh my gosh.
That is 1 damage off lethal. Azure Drake, Arcane Missiles for 5 if they all go face, but he can also throw the Arcane Blast first at the Loot Hoarder to guarantee it doing 5. Put the Mage on permanent ping death for every turn for the rest of the game. Honestly, that just kind of looks like the play.
Right, and Deerjason's only going to be able to delay the inevitable with that Ice Block. He doesn't have nearly enough mana to even consider things like Alex Strazing his face back up to 15. We're only on turn 6 here.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised to see Deerjason scooting out of this game. He can play an Ice Block and get it pinged, and we can play that little game for the next couple of turns, but this game is more or less over. I don't see a line that survives until turn 9, at which point he'd need to have drawn Alex Straza anyway, and then use it to heal, still find a way to have dealt with this board while keeping himself alive. It seems like a ridiculous proposition, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Deerjason just conserving the mental energy here and just moving on to the next game.
Ice Barrier, to note here, is now a dead card at this point, since there's no way that APXVoiD is going to be sending a minion into Deerjason's face. He can just use his hero power 2 times in a row. So Ice Barrier great early on against the Tempo Mage, not so great now. Just use this.
Yep, Jason is going to consider all his options. I guess he might as well throw out the Arcane Intellect, see if any of the cards that he draws gives him any form of inspiration, but I'm really not seeing it myself. He plays the Ice Block. The Ice Block is going to get pinged immediately. And I'm not sure how he's planning to find a way out of this, but I guess he's just going to play it out. There's definitely nothing wrong with that either. This is an incredibly high-stakes game, so I can understand not wanting to concede in the right situation.
All right, Arcane Intellect here from APXVoiD. Might as well take some time, get a few more options.
Yep, developing an even more intimidating board. He now has a minion resilient to Flame Strike as well. Not that that would matter, because Flame Strike would just lead to death via the Mage hero power. So this is looking pretty grim for Jason. The second Ice Block will keep him alive for one more turn, but he would have no way to bridge that gap between turn 7 Ice Block and turn 9 Alexstrasza. So the game was definitely over. Deerjason stuck it out. As I said, can't really blame him. One of the biggest games he's played in a couple of years, since 2014, you'd have to say, when he made a very deep run back then, but no surprise to see him just play it out, just in case he missed one of his outs in his mind. Makes sense, right?
Right, and hey, there's no time limit here. You're not required to say, hey, there's no possible way I can win, I'm going to go ahead and concede. And you also could take that time to consider, hey, what's my next matchup? And it gives you a little more breathing room for that, whereas your opponent might not have that thought in his head. He might be thinking, well, there is this one way out. So possibly a psychological advantage there, though minimal.
Very, very minimal, yeah. APXVoiD does pick up the win with that Tempo Mage. The build-up at the start was justified. He did get that Mana Worm. It did deal a ton of damage. Incredible aggression, being able to burst down a Freeze Mage so quickly, you know, quicker than we've even really seen Face Shamans or anything like that do in the tournament so far. So incredibly aggressive start. Justified, takes out the Freeze Mage, so he's going to have to just pick up a win with his remaining decks. Deerjason, of course, still has his entire lineup at his disposal.
Yep, still thinking about that Frostbolt going into game number 2 here. APXVoiD, he's got, what has he picked here? This is his Zoo
by
deck?
the looks of things, right?
Okay.
Yep. So he does have the Crazed Alchemist tech, and that Crazed Alchemist is going to look very favorable when Doomsayer number 1 comes down, but Doomsayer number 2 might have something to say about proceedings, but it wouldn't be surprising if Deerjason only ends up keeping one of these, honestly, in which case the Crazed Alchemist can be a huge blowout.
Right, the first Doomsayer, pretty good on turn 2.
Yep.
The second Doomsayer, apparently, Deerjason thinks pretty good on turn 3, but it's also great to combine these Doomsayers with freeze effects. That way they can wipe out larger boards guaranteed.
Yeah, early Doomsayer against Zoo is a lot more promising than it used to be. Doomsayer was generally a card that you looked for a late-game Frostnova with in a lot of situations, because if you dropped a Doomsayer on turn 2 against Zoo, they just responded with Nerubian Egg, emoted 3 or 4 times, laughed at you, got a 4/4 on the board. So with most of those death rattles being removed from the format now, suddenly the tempo Doomsayer early is actually a lot more effective, but he chose not to respond there against just the solo Argent Squire. He's going to wait for a little bit more value.
Now Doomsayer is going to go down, and that means that a Juggle is not going to be enough with that Direwolf Alpha to beat it. But we obviously see the Crazed Alchemist there. So APXVoiD, yeah, he's probably going to like this new recipe coming up in just a moment.
Yeah, the problem with this line, as you say, is that the first Doomsayer, now that it's been delayed, can be answered by the Crazed Alchemist. That would have happened either way. But now, once the Crazed Alchemist comes down, there's so much pressure on the board that the second Doomsayer has no chance. And now it's going to have to wait for that freeze effect.
This is where, if you're Deerjason, you kind of wanted more card draw in place of this other Doomsayer.
Right.
He's not going to be useful necessarily unless another freeze effect comes down.
So yet again, we see an incredibly aggressive start early from APXVoiD against the Freeze Mage, but now that Frostnova pickup is a big deal, because having seen the Crazed Alchemist used, unless there is secretly 2 in APXVoid's deck, which there is not, he is only playing the 1, then with no silence effect as well, this Doomsayer is pretty much a guaranteed banker now for Jason.
Possibly some positioning issues there with the Wolf, or with the Crazed Alchemist, since it could have been on the right side of the Wolf, I believe. Maybe not. I have to think back and look at that. But
yeah, I don't see any reason why it couldn't. Sure.
Forbidden Ritual here going to deal 4 damage as a card, or Defender of Argus dealing 3. Defender of Argus playing a little bit into potentially just kind of, you kind of need it a little bit later to protect your board against Blizzard and some other things. So
if he casts Forbidden Ritual here, that deals 4 damage. He has 7 on his board right now, so he'd be pushing 11. So his opponent would go down to 11, respond with Frostnova Doomsayer on the following turn. You're honestly not that far off just lethal with Leroy Jenkins in your hand, because of course the Direwolf would stick to the board. But as we mentioned, Frostnova Doomsayer is going to be a very, very big deal here. Without that Frostnova Doomsayer combination here, he would be in a world of pain.
one benefit possibly to playing the defender was that he would have had open board space for a Forbidden Ritual or potentially another card.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, ultimately, maybe not the winning play here. He's got the Leroy in hand, so that 11 health of Deerjason is looking very much in reach.
I think that's why he just wanted to push the damage under all costs. You know, that was a way he could guarantee that that one card in his hand, the Forbidden Ritual, dealt 4 damage, and then rationing that out with the Leroy, he's able to burst out over a few turns. But yeah, one of the benefits of the Frostnova Doomsayer play there is, of course, the board was full, locked out. There couldn't be any form of development, not even a possessed villager or something could have been dropped to get that 1/1's worth of tempo on the board.
Power overwhelming. That brings him up to 10. 1 to go. So that 1 damage from putting his Crazed Alchemist on the other side might have been the difference in this game. We'll have to see. Mortal Coil, good option. Sir Finley might give him that extra damage too in a future turn.
Yeah, Sir Finley can be a reasonably decent pickup against Freeze Mage. Just honestly, any source of damage from off the board is a very big deal in this matchup. So we're talking about Druid hero power, Hunter hero power, Mage hero power, any of the above, because Mage can lock out your board very, very effectively, and this deck only plays the 1 charge minion in Leroy to be able to deal damage off the board as well as the Soulfire. So any source of damage from off the board can be a big deal, but he just goes with the Mortal Coil, which makes a lot of sense as well. Just cycles through his deck, takes care of the problem in front of him, which is the minions in play, picks up the Councilman for his efforts as well.
Councilman, very high health minion, likely to stick around so that it can deal that 1 damage. And ultimately, that's all APXVoiD needs at this point. 1 damage.
1 damage indeed. Ice Lance is picked up, so there is a great deal of burn building up in Jason's hand right now, but burn is not what he needs right now. He needs answers to the board. He does have an Ice Block that can stall out. He does have a Flame Strike, but neither of those cards are particularly appropriate right now to address this Darkshire Councilman, which is definitely a big deal. If he Flame Strikes this board, he'd have to trade his 1/1 in as well just to deal with the board, and it's not a great Flame Strike at the best of times. But otherwise, I mean, it's not particularly attractive to deal with any other way. You could just choose to Frostbolt and ping it to just isolate it on the board and try and deal with it on a later turn.
And that might seem a little bit excessive right now. Deerjason knows he's at 11. His opponent's likelihood of having that 11 burst damage, he'd have to have Leroy. There's only 1 card in the deck, only 1 Leroy, so he might not decide to play around that particular combination here.
Runs out on me.
Yep, so he does go with the play, just isolating the Darkshire Councilman, using the Frostbolt to lock it out. This means it gets caught in a Flame Strike next turn if he needs to go down that line, and he has enough mana spare to develop the Ice Block. So this looks like a solid line, but Darkshire Councilman number 2 is a minion that doesn't get caught in that Flame Strike.
Man, that 1 damage earlier on. I don't know if APXVoiD realized it, but I might be beating myself up over it. But there we go. Power overwhelming number 2. Now the problem here is you're going to be setting your opponent at 11 health when you choose to destroy the Ice Block if you don't have any minions left on board.
True. Acolyte of Pain is a card he would have loved to have earlier when he wasn't under quite so much pressure. Ping into Frostnova is a play that Jason is possibly considering here just to stall the board even further. Again, try and set up the Flame Strike, but there's the Defender of Argus that can bring these minions back up to 5 potentially, but he does have the option to Flame Strike and Ping on the following turn, so 5 is not going to be good enough to prevent the board clear.
So it's likely to be a block clear here with Leroy getting 1 out of the way.
Yeah.
He might also decide to set his opponent to 10 and not destroy the Ice Block. That way, the Knife Juggler has multiple ways to destroy him. If
Set him to 1, you mean? Sorry.
Yeah, set him to 1.
Yep.
Yeah, if he sets himself to 1, great. I know I didn't pop the block, but hey, maybe in a future turn I get 1 damage as opposed to getting 11 in many future turns.
Right, and I think that's exactly what APXVoiD is considering right now. We just saw his mouse movements go from Leroy to the Knife Juggler, which seems to suggest that theory that you've just come up with, where he's considering the 10 damage instead and trying to follow up with that Knife Juggler later. So we will see. Power Overwhelming number 1 is used. Power Overwhelming number 2 is going to come down as well. So he is just going to commit to breaking the block. He does break it at 11, which is suboptimal, but it is 1 Ice Block down.
Yeah, now this Flame Strike's going to leave a lot of minions on the board for Deerjason. A lot of ways for him to do damage. Probably going to draw with the Acolyte here first.
Yep.
Possibly multiple cards.
Yeah, I see no reason not to get your 2 cards off this Acolyte first and foremost. I mean, you will get punished by the Knife Juggler by doing it that way, but I think I value the additional draw by trading into that Voidwalker in isolation over the just 1 damage to face and the 1 extra health on the minion, but maybe Deerjason is a genius and is playing around exactly Knife Juggler Forbidden Ritual here.
It looks like he has kind of predicted that. The second Forbidden Ritual, of course, this game, which means kind of less likely for it to be there. But hey, that's 6 juggles this turn. He can choose to play Voidwalker with it or just choose to play Forbidden Ritual, one or the other.
Yeah, he's gone ahead and life tapped, which means he probably isn't going to commit to the full Forbidden Ritual this turn. He's going to go for some of his other minions, which is fine too. He doesn't need a huge amount of juggles. That Knife Juggler represents a decent threat on the board. He's going to go ahead and play out the Possessed Villager, and now probably just use the Forbidden Ritual, having seen the Flame Strike just for 3, which is totally fine as well. And he's going to be wanting to dodge this Acolyte of Pain. Never mind.
Mr. Juggles, you have betrayed us once again.
Oh, and the double shot into the Acolyte of Pain picks up the Blizzard on the second to last draw for Jason, which is a fantastic pickup for him. Still no second Ice Block in hand though, so he is still under threat, but as we said, 1 charge minion in the deck already used.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to establish another board here if you're APXVoiD, and, well, I think he actually it might just be over for him at this point. I don't know that he's going to be able to play 2 minions and actually have them stick to the board in future turns here.
Yeah, it's not looking great, and the more and more he life taps, the more he opens himself up to the counter swing from Deerjason here, who is still sitting on Fireball, Frostbolt, and Ice Lance, so it's getting very, very precarious right now for APXVoiD. Flame Imps are aggressive minions, but they do just further play into that idea that suddenly you can just get yourself in range of burst from the Freeze Mage.
14 total damage in Deerjason's hand right now, so 2 Flame Imps actually, I think, set him to that.
I mean, this is a basic dichotomy here between Flame Imp and Voodoo Doctor. Do you want the higher quality minion that represents more damage, or do you want to play around the burst win condition from the Mage? That's basically the direct decision here. Don't think Young Dragonhawk quite enters the equation though.
No, right now you've got the Angel on one shoulder, you got the Devil on the other shoulder, and behind you there's just some weird beast thing. Yeah, we pretend he's not there.
I have Wind Fury, I can attack twice, you know. That's nice. Yeah, Flame Imp #1 going to come down. Defender of Argus alongside with it. And yeah, he's going to put himself, it looks, down to 12 here.
That's
it. That seems pretty sketchy because we have Fireball, Frostbolt, Ice Lance coming back the other way from Deerjason. And he is going to square up this series. Pretty strong stuff from Jason, despite the Doomsayers early on not working out for him. Definitely a difficult matchup to win for the Zoo player. And Deerjason takes advantage of that good matchup with the Freeze Mage. Freeze Mage deck that we've seen struggle quite a lot, and the series is now level.
Well, 2 different decks for each player. Which ones are coming out next? It's kind of that balanced 2v2 situation. You're kind of, sometimes it's a coin flip, sometimes you got to have those mind games in mind.
Yeah, pretty much, and it's a very, very similar scenario here. We have 2 aggressive Shamans and 2 Zoos remaining, if I'm looking at this lineup correctly. So basically, this is going to be the battle of both players trying to line up the Zoo into their opponent's Shaman. That's what both players are going to want to do. So the mental game here is that your opponent is more likely to pick the Zoos. What does that mean? So like it starts to get a little bit complex, but who wins this battle is going to be more important here. But I would expect that this all kind of comes out in the wash and we see a Zoo mirror right now.
I agree. The difference between these Zoo decks, of course, Sea Giants. One deck has 2, that's Deerjason's deck. The other has 1. There's Gormok the Impaler in APXVoiD's deck, which is where the Deerjason's Sea Giant probably comes from, what slot it kind of took up there. Any other differences here?
Deerjason has the Bran as well, which I believe APXVoiD does not have. Yeah, so there are a few differences. Bran's an interesting inclusion in Zoo these days because, sure, Bran sometimes made magic happen in Zoo, but I feel like more importantly, you just sometimes wanted something extra to play on turn 3 because you only had the Imp Gang boss. But now with Councilman, it seems a little bit superfluous to me. And we do see Zoo lining up into the Shaman here, which is very, very interesting to me. It's interesting that APXVoiD took the risk of picking the Shaman, knowing that the best he could get was the mirror match against the other aggressive Shaman, and the worst case scenario, he was running into Zoo.
Right, so he's just got to think, what minions can I get here? He's going to have to focus on this game now at this point. Totem Golem, very good start at the moment.
Never mind, I think I figured it out. I've just looked at his Face Shaman list. He does have Elemental Destruction in his Face Shaman list, which makes the world of difference.
Right, since Nerubian Egg, Piloted Shredder, some of these Death Rattle minions that were in Naxxramas and Goblins vs. Gnomes have been cycled out, AoE clears for anybody have become a lot more powerful because it doesn't leave residual minions on the board afterwards.
Right. Ooh. 3 opening hand 2-drops is not what he wanted to see, but the Abusive Sergeant will make him feel a little bit happier, but that joy will quickly be evaporated when the Abusive Sergeant gets answered by Voidwalker.
This is not an efficient trade, never will be, but hey, Totem Golem, and hey, he does have the Abusive Sergeant to follow up with that Totem Golem when he's overloaded there with an Eternal Sentinel. But, interesting question here. The Abusive probably not going to be useful since he'll still have to deal with this Voidwalker on the board.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's almost no way that Abusive Sergeant enables anything useful on the following turn because the Totem Golem will be obligated to attack into the remaining 1/1 regardless, unless like Peddler into Mortal Coil or something ridiculous happens. So the Abusive Sergeant probably not going to be useful too quickly, but at the same time he doesn't really have anything else to do with his hand. So be interested to see how he approaches this turn.
Imp Gang Boss probably going to lend himself to not deal with Abusive Sergeant there.
Right.
Doesn't really want to play a minion into it. Even Eternal Sentinel's kind of bad against this Imp Gang Boss. And that Imp Gang Boss, one of the great minions in Warlock, which can help deal with these early Totem Golems. Since, hey, 4 attack, Totem Golem, you do not have that.
Absolutely. So he's going to go ahead and play the Eternal Sentinel here just for the minion presence. He needs to get things on board right now, but the consideration is whether or not he plays that Abusive Sergeant. It's going to be look a little bit bizarre if he unlocks that mana just to play nothing, and he is in fact going to go ahead and develop the 2/1 to the board just to contest the state of the board more effectively, and he's actually managing to flood the board a little more effectively than Zoo, at least for the first couple of turns, but suddenly Imp Gang Boss and Councilman start working together in combination and put a stop to that pretty quickly.
Right, and he's actually probably made this play for this exact reason. Councilman comes down, he needs 5 damage to take care of it so he can stay in the game, and that even leaves his Totem Golem on the board. But we can see in his hand now, APXVoiD is kind of at one of those crossroads where you're on turn 4, you don't want to overload yourself, but at the same time, that Lava Burst is looking really juicy right now.
Yeah, the Lava Burst does look fantastic, especially since the alternative is just essentially to play another Bloodfen Raptor and a Totem, which isn't really going to get him very far, so I'm a big fan of the Lava Burst. Doomhammer isn't really a necessity on turn 5 against this deck. You really want to be fighting for the board more effectively. Doomhammer can be a great board control tool, of course. You're not obligated to go face with it, despite what some people might believe. But if the numbers on the Zoo players' minions don't add up quite perfectly for you to attack with a Doomhammer, then it can kind of just be a waste of a turn 5 play.
Sea Giant just out of range here. Crazed Alchemist, any good plays with that? Doesn't look like it right now. Everything's kind of at lower health, so might be able to get your Imp Gang Boss up there, get an extra Imp off that Searing Totem on the right.
Yeah,
nope.
he's one off with Sea Giant about a million different ways right now. I was looking at fancy stuff with switching stuff with Crazed Alchemist so you can actually get an extra Imp off the Imp Gang Boss, but then you're still one short of the Sea Giant, so yeah, he's going to make another more straightforward play. Just hope that that Sea Giant comes down on the next turn now, which is looking pretty likely to, but APXVoiD is going to be rewarded for his line of holding onto the Lava Burst because Doomhammer is actually quite effective this turn, so it turns out.
Looks like Voidwalker is going to be taken out here. Direwolf Alpha 2. The Doomhammer is an excellent tool, of course, for Shaman to get board control back from Zoo, and then hopefully put together that damage with a big burst.
Right.
Looks like we're going to have some slightly less complicated board states going forward here. Both players are running out of cards at this point, and hey, might just be the strategy of play everything, and hope they stick.
Yep, makes a lot of sense, and this is, again, just another one of the applications of Crazed Alchemist. It turns temporary buffs into permanent ones. So the Abusive Sergeant allows him to get in 5 damage to face, and then stick a 2/5 to the board by flipping the stats.
That's going to make Flame Juggler weaker, since it could hit that minion instead of other ones.
Right.
It's going to change quite a bit. All right, Sir Finley. Druid Hero power would be interesting here, because his Doomhammer would become 3 attack, twice instead of just 2. However, Life Tap would give him potentially the cards he needs to overpower the Zoo, the Warlock hero power, which is Life Tap, of course.
Right, he doesn't have a great deal of life to play with right now, though, which makes Life Tap slightly concerning. The Shapeshift is interesting in this situation because, as you said, it's useful when you're using the Doomhammer for board control. People like this Druid hero power for the damage that it gives to Doomhammer when they're going face a lot of the time, but in that situation, it's kind of the same thing as the Hunter hero power, except you still can't go through taunts. But when you're trying to do damage to minions, suddenly the ability to do 3 with a single attack is very relevant in a lot of situations.
Decides to go with Life Tap. He's basically saying, hey, I need more cards here. If I don't get more cards, Zoo's going to get more cards than me, and eventually 2 minions to my 1 are going to overpower me. Does decide to use his Doomhammer for board control still.
And still, just permanently 1 mana short of being able to play that Sea Giant at any given time. It's been sat dead in hand for a long time. Deerjason is the guy running 2 of them, and this is the danger sometimes. They can sit in your hand a little bit dead. Definitely very greedy to put 2 of them in your list, but still, when they come down, when you get those good starts, they can blow out games very, very quickly.
Use of Sergeant here. Gonna let him trade into that Flame Juggler nice and cleanly, leaving it at 3 health as well, which is not the health you kind of want to see when you're...
Oh boy!
Well, hey, there we go. Elemental Destruction gives him an option to clear the board, which is going to once again deactivate that Sea Giant.
Yeah, that Elemental Destruction is massive. So is that Rockbiter weapon. Suddenly, with 2 back-to-back draws, this game has absolutely flipped on its head. The one slight downside is that he has already used 2 of his Eternal Sentinels, and I don't think he's running Lava Shock in his deck. No, he is not. So this locked mana, the 5 overload from the Elemental Destruction, will definitely be a thing, but having drawn that Rockbiter, he doesn't need a great deal of mana on a following turn to have an effective turn.
All right, Finley's adventure is over, and APXVoiD going ahead and spending the Rockbiter now, knowing that he's going to need that damage later on anyway.
Sure.
Might as well utilize your mana.
Yep, so locks up 5 mana crystals on that turn, which means next turn he is able to cast the Lava Burst in hand with his 3 remaining mana on turn 8. So his hand lines up pretty perfectly right now, and still, that Doomhammer can be used for board control if he would like. There's only 2 2-health minions coming down to the board, although the Peddler does, of course, have potential to pick up another minion for Jason to play.
All right, it's only going to be 2 off of lethal with APXVoiD's hand currently, so he's just looking for 1 card at this point with his remaining mana. That Life Tap might get him a Lava Burst, and then I think he'll be locked out of mana at that point.
Well, he will have exactly 3 mana on this turn coming up, right? So he can cast that 1 Lava Burst that he has in hand, not a great deal more than that. Picks up that look like Argent Horse Rider. Yes, indeed it is. So how does he ration this out to find the best way of achieving lethal? Using the Horse Rider to trade is probably the safest, since this is very quickly turned into a race scenario. Means that he can focus on sending as much damage as he can face, but he has to set himself up a win condition here.
Double Power Overwhelming from Deerjason, if he has that, yes. If he had that, rather, would be a bit scary here.
Yeah, he's
12 damage.
7 damage away, so the option to go all face is definitely a real one. That would be 6 damage to the face and leave you remaining with Lava Burst in hand that can beat any potential Defender of Argus play. That would be the correct way to sequence it, but that would of course be risky. You're leaving a high damage minion on the board in the form of Knife Juggler. That can represent a lot of damage in a lot of situations. So this is an all-in play if you go all face here, but APXVoiD may just calculate that it's the highest win percentage.
Gonna save the Doomhammer. He's banking on Rockbiter instead of a second Doomhammer here, I believe.
What I will say is that Sea Giant that we've discussed heavily is a card that's been sat dead on the left-hand side of Deerjason's hand for a large period of the game. So if you are APXVoiD, you can account for that card being a burst damage card, in which case you are very likely to be dead. So I can definitely understand the timid line that he took with so much on the line based on that information, but I think it's going to end up costing him the game in this scenario.
Yeah, APXVoiD not finding what he needed here. 2 minions that he drew there, not able to deal immediate damage on the board, and that means Deerjason is going to take game number 3.
Yes, he is. There you can see, left remaining on 2 life, so that Horse Rider connecting with face on the previous turn would have been lethal. Didn't have the damage to punish him for it, but definitely not going to go out there and call that one a strict mistake because, you know, I try to explain the reasoning behind it. We can see that that card he's holding onto is a Sea Giant. You can definitely, as the opponent, give that card credit for being Sea Giant. There's 2 in the list. You've been keeping really, really close attention to the state of the board. You can work out there was no turn where playing Sea Giant was possible. That would be an incredible level of perception into the state of the game, though. I think the natural assumption for a lot of people would be to say, okay, that card's probably Leroy or a Power Overwhelming or just something that's going to kill me.
Right, and hey, what are the odds of him having this Sea Giant and me not being able to pick up that extra card?
Right.
With it's just 2 damage you're looking for, and this Shaman list is full of damage. And he probably was thinking, hey, yeah, the odds of Sea Giant, probably pretty low. Or maybe, hey, even if it goes out there, I'm still pretty likely to get 2 more damage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it has put him in a rough spot now because he is behind in the series 1 game to 2. And Deerjason just needs to pick up a win with his aggressive Shaman deck. His aggressive Shaman deck does not have the luxury of an Elemental Destruction, even though it didn't end up making too big of a difference in that game for APXVoiD, who wasn't able to pick up the win anyway.
Yeah, Deerjason's going to have to throw away some of these cards. He's probably debating keeping Lightning Bolt, but on going first, it's a little bit awkward. Nothing to Lightning Bolt turn 1, and it overloads you later. So he throws it away and finds Sir Finley. Very powerful in this matchup, as we saw with that life tap last game.
Yeah, it's one of the first basic lessons to learn about the right ways to mulligan in this game is that generally going first, you want to be the guy playing the proactive stuff, whereas you can keep more reactive stuff going second because you're naturally a little bit behind the play. But as you gestured there, that was not a great selection of hero powers for Deerjason.
Yeah, you end up with the ones that either A, prevent your Doomhammer from really being as valuable, or this one becomes less valuable, or a heal, which, you know, you're an aggro deck. You're going for face damage. You don't want to really heal yourself, but does help with your minions. Or those 1/1 tokens, which are usually the worst option as this deck.
Yes, indeed. Power Overwhelming is a very big deal to take out the Totem Golem early, though. Gets the 1/3 down against the 1/2, so relatively competitive. This is generally how this matchup goes, is that Zoo slowly but surely grabs a hold of the board. They have the more consistent early game board presence. They also play all the buff cards that can leverage their minions advantageously against Shamans, whereas Shaman does not have that advantage the other way around.
Choosing to attack with the Wicked Knife, but not with Finley. That way, this Voidwalker is not going to get that extra damage if there's a Mortal Coil or something else.
Makes sense.
Still going to allow him to, should the Voidwalker jump into this Finley, be able to take it out.
Yep, it looks like he is going to use the Abusive Sergeant just to pick up the favorable trade here. Now the dagger is equipped, the trade isn't as favorable as it would have been otherwise. Looks like he's going to coin out the Forbidden Ritual here to pick up the extra 1/1 on the board. This is just all about trying to ensure he banks a decent Defender of Argus on curve for the following turn.
Right, and we do know APXVoiD does have the Gormok in the deck, so there's potential activation there.
Very true.
This Shaman deck doesn't have that AoE, so a lot of ways these tentacles are going to be staying alive this time around.
Yeah, 0 Elemental Destruction, 0 Lightning Storm in Deerjason's deck. Of course, he is running the version we've talked about at some length, playing that extra Stormforged Axe alongside the South Sea deckhand. So, haven't seen any of those cards come out just yet, but we'll see if that makes any sort of impact on the game, which also is worth mentioning, makes his reasoning for picking up Rogue Hero power more important, because he has those 2 deckhands in his deck.
Wow, I actually didn't think about that.
Yeah.
All right, we got Doomhammer here. Pretty certain that's going to be the play.
Yep, but this is almost exactly the reverse of the situation we saw in the previous game. Like, sure, Doomhammer represents a bunch of board control, but honestly, you end up taking far too much damage. Zoo can just keep refilling quite happily. Defender of Argus #2 makes this board awkward to deal with. So does a 4/4, quite honestly. Both of these plays seem reasonable. And with both players sat on Leroy Jenkins in hand, the player who is winning the race is at a significant advantage.
APXVoiD actually has not utilized his hero power just yet, so it's very important to note. The weapons that Thrall has been equipping and slamming into minions with have only been working against him in the long run. You're going the wrong way, Thrall. You're supposed to be hitting the other face, not your own.
Right. Suddenly, Lava Burst #2 changes the complexion of this game just a little bit. That is 10 damage from the Rockbiter weapon, 10 more damage from Lava Bursts, and 6 damage from Leroy plus an additional 2 from an Abusive Sergeant. So he does pretty much just threaten lethal with his hand right now, but It's going to be a difficult race to win, so he is going to go ahead and ration out some of that damage. Lava Burst, a minion. Of course, what I didn't account for in that quick calculation is that he still has additional Doomhammer attacks as well, so he has damage to spare, actually.
It's going to be a 2-turn attempt here by Deerjason. He knows that it's likely he's not going to have any more turns than that, but Defender of Argus is going to seal up some of his hopes here. Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, but he does have Lava Burst. He will be able to break through this and leave just 1 minion on the board. I do believe, though, that is going to be... Oh, hey, he saved. He saved.
South Sea Deckhand, the savior that Deerjason needed. He is not... Well, I mean, from his perspective, this looks relatively promising, but is he going to have the wherewithal to Lava Burst a minion here? And even if he did, Leroy Jackson... Oh, and again, Leroy Jenkins comes out of the hand just to finish the game.
Leroy Jackson.
Yes, indeed. I blame you for this, Bob. I think you've spread this virus amongst us.
And spread the virus I did by my own volition, not accidentally.
Nice.
Or so I'll say.
Deerjason is going to consider the relative merits of whether to Lava Burst one of these minions. The whole thing is pretty much a formality. Leroy Jenkins is going to come out of the hand here and end the game. APXVoiD is going to tie up the series.
I wonder why we never say Reno Jackson.
Reno Jenkins, you mean?
Reno Jenkins?
Yeah.
That too.
I wonder why we don't say Reno Jackson, because that's just actually his name. Yeah.
Yeah. We wouldn't want to be correct.
Exactly.
That would be against the point.
Indeed. But the series is tied up 2-2. Yet again, a 5-game series for me. I am just absolutely loving it. Even though this series is quick games between 2 aggressive decks, going the distance again. I am loving the drama of all these games. Yet again, qualification for the Americas Championship is on the line, is going all the way to a Game 5.
And how do you feel about a Game 5 yet again, Mr. Subtle?
I mean, I'm over the moon. Even though we're going to see a Face Shaman versus Face Shaman here, there's an interesting twist between these two decks: the South Sea Deckhand Leroy version versus the more pure, consistent, classic version. But it does have that elemental destruction in it, which can be a big deal as well.
Yeah, that can swing the board back around quite quickly, or it might just end up dead in your hand if you end up ahead of the game. Right. So it could swing it actually either way, depending on how the board state is.
That's very true. You can just bring it off the top of your deck on a turn where you just really need to draw damage and just curse the fact that you put this card in your deck in the first place. But this is it. It's all on the line right here. Game 5, yet again, coming down to the wire. We are going to see the clash of aggressive shamans. And right now, one of them is staring at a Tunnel Trog and one of them is not.
And that Tunnel Trog is unaccompanied by Overload at the moment. And the good thing about that is this Abusive Sergeant can be handled by it. But hey, let's pick up another 1-drop here and double the efforts here. Sir Finley, will you treat Deerjason a little bit better this time? Looks like yes. Life Tap. Life Tap's a bit risky to take in an Shaman versus Shaman matchup.
Right, Life Tap essentially just turns you into the glass cannon in this matchup. You're going to be the guy that's drawing damage consistently whenever you want, but you also just make yourself a bunch more fragile. Fire Blast is the best board control hero power in the game, more or less, especially in a matchup where you don't want to take a bunch of damage face tanking stuff with the rogue hero power. But, I mean, both of these are serious considerations, and this is a massively important decision because it very, very easily just sets the tone for the entire matchup at this point. It does go with the board control option, picks up the Mage Fire Blast.
Considering coining out Tunnel Trog here as well, the reason you might not do this is considering 3 drops that you might get here, but there aren't a whole lot of them that actually are great when you don't have Tunnel Trog on the board.
No, absolutely, and it looks like, I mean, if he's essentially forcing his opponent to trade here because he has a perfectly reasonable turn 2 with just pinging off this 2-1 if he wants to, so he's kind of obligating the 2-1 to go into one of these minions just based on the threat of his turn 2 being ping your guy.
All right, this quickly went from Shaman v Shaman to Mage versus Druid.
Yeah, with that Doomhammer in hand, the Druid hero power definitely looks very promising, but before he gets to that Doomhammer, he is going to have to find some way to address this board because this matchup, although they're both aggressive decks, it's often not a matchup that's dictated by pure damage. It's a matchup that's dictated by early board control and who's able to grip it.
So APXVoiD is deciding, hey, do I want to go ahead and deal damage to his face and force him to be the one to trade, Deerjason, or do I want to hit that Trog and kind of soften it up a little bit so that my Argent Horse Rider is better? We do see Lightning Bolt coming up in the hand, and Abusive Sergeant. A lot of good options here.
It certainly is. He's actually going to go ahead and use the Earth Shock and the Abusive Sergeant. Hold on to the Lightning Bolt for potential burst damage to buff up his Trog even further on a following turn. Picks up the value trade. And as I said, this game very much going to be about the early board control. Argent Horse Rider is a nice tool to come back and try and address this board, but still that Tunnel Trog remains unchecked on the board, and the Mage hero power is going to very easily take over the remains of the Horse Rider.
Right, and once again, we're presented with an awkward overload situation here on APXVoiD's side. If he plays the Horse Rider this turn, he's only got overload cards left to play, which will block him out of Doomhammer on turn 5. And right now, Doomhammer on turn 5 is looking like a necessity so that he can clear out this board.
That is an excellent point. I mean, the Horse Rider does just look like the most effective play right now. Does use it to take out the 2-1, but Deerjason is going to be perfectly happy with this scenario. Picks up another 1-drop that he can play if he would like to. Is going to drop it out. This board is pecking away, but it is controlling the state of the game, which is the most important thing right now. Damage not ramping up too quickly just yet, but it does represent a lot of damage over the course of the game.
Once again, kind of an awkward mana situation here for APXVoiD. He's going to go ahead and play the Totem Golem, ping off with his hero power the South Sea deckhand here. Totem Golem representing a pretty decent threat on the board at the moment. And Deerjason running a little bit out of cards, and his power on the board is, as we said, it's just little pecks of damage here. Not a whole lot.
All right, how much do you believe in your Flame Juggler right now? That's the
question.
question.
Not a lot.
Jason had Faith, which now means that he doesn't have the mana to Lightning Bolt and ping this Totem Golem, so he's going to be forced to trade into it. He could have taken the safe line just with the Lightning Bolt and the ping, kept the Flame Juggler in his hand. He recognizes he needs to capitalize on this advantage that he has right now, though. Tries to make the winning play with the Flame Juggler. Doesn't loses the 50-50, but still, it was a fairly safe 50-50 to attempt, because even worst case scenario, you're still ahead on the board.
And here we are with the awkward overload once again. Now with the Feral Spirits being cast, Doomhammer's once again locked out. So, you really hate to see these kind of hands when you're the Shaman player.
I mean, when your cards are as powerful as Shaman cards, I feel like there needs to be a price of admission somewhere. Overload is the mechanic that they've been given. Sometimes your hand does just line up very, very awkwardly like this. Even more overload following the overload that you've just cast. But honestly, overload is a frustrating mechanic. I think it's been getting designed better as time has gone on. We've seen more and more effective overload cards come out, but it's still very, very difficult to manage in a lot of situations.
Let's look at these hand sizes here. APXVoiD has 5 cards in hand, and Deerjason has this Lava Shock, which is just a little card. And at this point in the game, Lava Shock unlocking overload crystals is not going to have a big impact. So yeah, I think it's time to Doomhammer. Clear the board, and hope your opponent doesn't draw that extra few bit of damage there.
I'm not sure if it is. Feral Spirit and Flame Tongue Totem looks very appealing. Even Feral Spirit and the hero power to take care of that 2-1 on the board. That would leave the potential of the 3 health Trog being able to pick up a potential value trade, but Doomhammer doesn't address the Tunnel Trog. I mean, you get to address 1 minion, essentially. You don't get to address the entire board with the Doomhammer, so it's definitely a difficult decision. That Doomhammer has been sat in hand for a very long time.
Shapeshift going out here. Get that trade. Lava Shock not going to be much help.
See what the draw is. It is the Doomhammer for Jason. He has a little moment of celebration. This is going to enable him to pick up the board clear on this turn, but most importantly, it rewards the early game initiative that he had. He needed one of these big follow-up cards. He needed to start drawing into damage sometime soon, or APXVoiD was just about finding a way to claw his way back into this game. But now there is Doomhammer Rockbiter sat in APXVoiD's hand, but he still has to find a way to answer the damage that's coming in from his opponent.
At this point, the tricky business here for APXVoiD is, hey, I do need to kill my opponent still. I can't play board control all day. But at the same time, yeah, I think not having this Doomhammer earlier might have been a little bit dangerous. Having that massive card advantage in his hand right now, it's just not working out for him.
There is a Leroy Jenkins drawn. Lava Shock can be cast first, which unlocks his mana. I do believe, Bob, we have another qualifier for the Americas Championship, and his name is Deerjason.
And he's been mostly expressionless and just kind of having a few emotes here, but now he is relieved. And you can see that sense of relief on his face as he takes the final game here.
Yeah, I mean, very, very well played from Deerjason overall. Navigated a lot of difficult matchups there. Those matchups between two decks that are trying to do similar things, you know, flood the board early, push damage, difficult to navigate. He did it very well. What's up, TJ?
Hey, yeah, big congratulations to Deerjason. He's a player that we saw, of course, in the 2014
That's right.
America's Championship. Made it there and didn't quite make it to BlizzCon. So now he's going to have a second chance to make it to that World Championship. So big congratulations to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really did come down to the wire there at the end. He got the fast start in that game 5, but he was one whiff draw away probably from losing control of that game if he didn't pick up that Doomhammer when he needed it. Was followed up by the Leroy as well, of course, but that was a little bit unnecessary. The game was under control at that point. The Doomhammer was the key card for sure.
Both times Shaman lost, it was when they actually were taking a lot of damage to their face to play board control. I find that to be... Hey, you know, you're going to the wrong face here, Mr. John.
Yeah, but I mean, we saw exactly like Saddle said. APXVoiD was very close to being able to wrestle back that series based on the board control. So good to see. APXVoiD, unfortunately, this is the second time in a row now that he's made it really far in a preliminary. In Winter, I think he made it to the same exact spot that he is now, or at least one round before, so round of 32. A little bit unfortunate for him, but I think he played pretty well. He can hold his head up high and come back for summer. But, you know, Deerjason, another young guy. He's sort of bringing down the average age again for the players that have qualified for that spring championship. We got a lot of youngins.
Yeah, the young blood is out in full force. Us old fossils don't have any hope. This is now a young man's game officially.
So we've seen quite a bit of games now. We only have one more match remaining. What have you thought of the field so far, Bob, that has made it into the spring championship?
Well, there's definitely some unique decks still making it into the championship. Yeah, I think the field's pretty good right now. Excited to see a lot of fresh players coming in here. Going to be really excited to get to know them a lot better as time goes on here and to introduce them to our viewers as well. Yeah,
up-and-comers, I think, is the big thing here. People that have been floating around the competitive scene for a long time but just made that step up. And talking about unique decks, Saddle, I know you were still thinking earlier the South Sea Deckhand Shaman.
Yeah.
And the Stormforge X Shaman wasn't going to make it through, but it did.
It did. Got the job done.
It's going to the Spring Championships.
It is, and yeah, I'm just really looking forward to getting to know some of these lesser-known names a little bit better at the Americas Championship. We saw it at Europe Championships for the winter season. They were unknown names going in, but a lot of them took the opportunity to establish themselves to impress a lot of people. I'm looking at Dr. Hippie, etc. Did a fantastic job. So these players have to view this as an opportunity. We only got to see them a little bit this weekend. We get to see them in much more detail during Championship.
Yeah, and talking about just the experience in preliminaries, Bradford Lee was in the last match was a pretty good example. And even going early back in the day, Sidonia, players that when they start naming off their practice partners, that's when you know you hear these names and you're like, wow, I know all these some of these names. Like these guys band together in practice, and it's really great to see. Bob, you're a player that plays in a lot of open tournaments. I know you were bragging before about how you have some top finishes.
I'll brag. I've got my HCT point for summer right now. Just one so far.
For summer. Have you seen some of the names of the players that are competing in Spring
Championship? I can name off a couple that weren't necessarily mentioned on stream. Hot Meowth, I ran into him a couple times. WTY Bill, of course. Pangya. He's from the Latin America region. Yeah,
he was a player that was beaten by, I think, Joester. Was a player that eliminated him from the tournament. Joester's a player that's actually moving on. And
the Rat, actually. But I think we did actually mention him, didn't we?
Oh, the Rat, he's on the board.
Yeah.
He was flying the flag for my picks for all of like 3 rounds.
I'm still the only person with a pick left in the tournament. I think at this stage, at least in the Europe preliminary, we still had like 3 names left on the board. I think a couple of the predictions. That just goes to show.
Wait, what are you talking about? You correctly predicted 7 choices.
Oh yeah, that's right. Now I'm remembering correctly. But we do have an interview ready with the winner, it appears, so we're going to send it over to Frodan.
We have our 7th player joining our list of 6 going to the Spring Championship, and this time it is a returning face to the Americas region. It's Deerjason, who made his appearance in 2014, and I have him on the line for just a quick few words before going to our final match. Jason, can you hear me?
It's a bit quiet.
No, that's okay. We're back here on Earth. When you come back from the moon, which I'm sure you're jumping over right now, we'll do it. So let's go into a quick couple questions here. How are you feeling right now that you qualified for your 2nd America's Championship?
I feel mainly relieved. It's a relief to finally make it back to a stage this big.
Absolutely. I think you and Chalky are the 2 players who've made an appearance both in 2014 and 2016. What are some of the lessons that you've learned the past year and a half since your last appearance?
Well, mainly I've switched to a more cancerous tournament lineup, so I've been trying various deck lists out, and I figured out that the best deck lists are like half control, a couple mid-range, and a couple aggro. It's not like all aggro.
Yeah, I used to be known as a pretty greedy control player back in the day. I remember you brought like Control Paladin when everyone else was playing relatively aggro decks. Talk to me a little bit about the journey through the tournament. You've been emoting a lot, and then some people emote you back, and then you were really expressive, and all of a sudden you seemed to calm down a little bit. How was the emotional process going through the qualification?
Well, it was kind of tough since a bunch of my opponents brought lineups that try to counter Zoo. Like 4 decks that try to counter Zoo. So for example, my 2nd match versus New Bowel, I had to top deck a Leroy for my Zoo to win. Otherwise, I probably would have lost that match. So it was a really tough journey because Zoo was targeted a lot.
Yeah, no doubt there. I think that was one of the decks people were looking for. I want to ask you one final question. Do you want to thank anybody? You want to have any final shout-outs before we let you go and see you next month for the championship?
Well, I'll probably do a shout out to the guys at Team Hearth League, since it's like a team-based, community-driven thing where teams practice, and I'm a captain on that, and it helped improve the fun level in Hearthstone a lot.
Absolutely. Never forget that, man, the fun level of Hearthstone. Congratulations, Deerjason. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
All right, so thankfully we were able to get a few words with our winner here. It looks like he's in a convention, and it was a little bit hard to hear him, but I hope you guys made out for the most part of it. I mean, we got to hear that in the end, he's still remembering to have fun in Hearthstone, and he had to readjust his style, which I think every player is experiencing as time goes on. You can't just always stick to one type of deck that you really like to play. You have to really branch out and make the best of it. What do you guys think of that series? What do you guys think of the 7 players we have so far? And what do you think about our upcoming match between Dwayne and APXVoiD? Let us know on social media, #HCT. Join us on twitter.com/playhearthstone or facebook.com/Hearthstone. Up next, we have our final match of the day. 7 spots are given out. Only one more person can go to the Spring Championship. We mentioned it's Dwayne versus APXVoiD, and Dwayne versus Nostam. I apologize. Wow, that was really awkward. I was saying APXVoiD because it was that. Anyways, let's go straight to the casters. Enough of Frodan messing up the names. Sato's here ready to guide us through for our last match of the day.